Welcome everybody to this Explorers event. On behalf of the International Federation for Public History, we welcome you. Today we have two brilliant colleagues who work on a very innovative and trendy topic. They will be talking about public history and video games, interconnections, uses, applications. Let me introduce them. We have with us today Ashley Morgan. She's a disabled early career researcher from Australia. She last semester undertook an internship with the Explorers team. We appreciate that very much. The logo you see behind me is Ashley's work. So kudos to that. And she also, she's undertaking a Bachelor of Ancient History with a specialization in ancient languages. She's also currently studying biological anthropology as part of a Master's of Archaeological and Evolutionary Science with the Australian National University, having completed a Bachelor of Arts in 2019 from the University of Wollongong, where she majored in modern history and ancient history and archaeology. In addition to her studies, she's also currently involved with the archaeogaming community and has presented her research within this field to both national and international audiences. And also here with us today is Dani Gay Belanger, a PhD candidate in game studies at the Université de Montréal and holds a master's degree in public history from Carleton University. His research aims to develop a holistic approach for the preservation and study of video games as cultural heritage artifacts in order to allow players and researchers present and future to access video games from every era of this medium's history. Dani also interned and was the Garth Wilson Fellow at the Canada Science and Technology Museum. He's currently the Francophone representative of the Canadian Game Studies Association and the Video Game Observation and Documentation University Lab Coordinator. He's also part of the Explorers team. Dani is the one who uploads all the videos of the Explorers to the video channel. So also kudos to Dani. I am Jimena Perry, your host, and as part of the Explorers team, we have with us archaeologist Hamish McLean. Welcome everybody. I'm going to please ask you to mute your mics, and when time comes, you can open them to ask Ashley and Dani questions. And you can also use the chat anytime you want for comments or observations or whatever. So welcome, Ashley and Dani. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having us. Ashley, do you want to talk about the format we're going to have today, or should I do it?
You can do it. You can jump in, and yeah.
So today we're not going to go with formal presentations. We're just going to introduce ourselves kind of briefly, maybe 5-minute thing. And then we're just going to jump in and ask each other questions on our respective areas of focus. So just feel free when we're asking questions to also raise your hands, ask questions, whatever, just to, it's more of a conversation than anything else. And so, of course, feel free to jump in. So that's going to be our format today. And since I've been talking, I'll let you introduce and talk about your stuff, Ashley, first.
Okay, so I have a tiny little presentation that I can hopefully share just to give a little bit of visual things while I talk for a little bit. I put it together in like 5 minutes, don't worry. Okay, let's see if this wants to work for me. Okay, can you guys see this?
Yes.
Yep, awesome. Okay, so today, as we discussed, we're going to be talking a bit about public history and video games and the different interconnections, uses, and applications that they can have within the field of public history. So first of all, I'd like to start by paying my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging from the Ngunnawal and Ngambri country that I'm presenting on today. And I extend these respects to any Indigenous or Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. I am Australian. This land is and was, and hopefully this will change soon, but is unceded Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander land. And yeah. So one thing that I love to start out with is just checking what people know about gaming. How many people here play video games? How many people have never played a video game? And of those of you that have played video games, have you ever wondered about the origins or the authenticity of what you're playing, or how it can be used to within public history as a whole? So why gaming? Why is gaming a thing that I'm looking at? So gaming is a giant industry with around $150 billion in 2020 and $268 billion expected in 2025. The gaming industry revenue was 3 times the 2019 music industry and 4 times the 2019 film industry, which that was the year that Endgame came out, which broke records for being the highest grossing film. So what exactly is archaeogaming that Yamana spoke about a little bit? So archaeogaming is the study of archaeology in and of video games, as well as the use of video games for archaeological purposes. So why is this important? So games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which had 1.8 million players within its first week, how many people, or what are people getting out of this game? How accurate is the history? How accurate is the environment? And yeah, there's also, I find gaming incredibly amazing as it's a very accessible format. There's a wide variety of accessibility settings that you can play with. If you do have any accessibility needs, I myself play with captions all the time. I edit the controls as well to make it easier and less taxing on my body to play. As well, you don't necessarily need to spend hundreds of dollars to access gaming. You can go onto YouTube and watch hundreds of streamers who have recorded their playthroughs of games, who will all have invariably different views on the topic or on the game. As well, platforms like Twitch, which I believe we're also streaming on currently, you can get on access or watch people playing video games themselves and interact with them while they're playing it. So some research that I've done within this field previously, I've looked at the mythologies within some blockbuster video games. So some of the recent bigger name games and how accurate the mythological representation is, and also where it's okay to not be as accurate for the sake of authenticity, which sounds weird. And recently also been looking at specifically Assassin's Creed Valhalla and the representations of mortuary culture within the game. So looking at different death scenes, tombstones, cemeteries, artwork, a whole bunch of different things and how it changes in region in game. And yeah, so I'm also hopefully or very soon starting looking at going back to the analysis of mythology within game, a cross-examination of the representations of the Norse end of days Ragnarok within the upcoming God of War Ragnarok game, as well as within Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So that's hopefully what you'll be seeing from me in the next year. Let's jump in. So what sort of games can you look at when you're looking at the public history of video games and the use of video games? So some of the games that I've personally looked at are here. So I've got the recent Tomb Raider trilogy, pretty much every one of the Uncharted games, God of War, the upcoming God of War Ragnarok, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, also some of the earlier entries in the Assassin's Creed game. As well, I've also been looking at Escape Simulator, which is a simulated escape room, which has some of its rooms set within an Egyptian tomb. So I really want to do a deep dive into that and looking at the accuracy, if the hieroglyphs are actually representative of what they're supposed to be. Yeah, so just fun things like that. But there's a whole bunch of other games that you can look at. So I've seen people doing stuff in Minecraft. There's a complete Minecraft recreation of Catalhoyuk, which I've probably said horribly. As well in games like Elder Scrolls Skyrim, Fallout series, Days Gone, which is a post-apocalyptic game. Phasmophobia, a ghost hunting game. I've seen analysis of that game. As well, we've got tabletop role-playing games, so things like Dungeons and Dragons, and also a entry within the Archeogaming sphere is Goblin Town, which I believe there's weekly or monthly streams of on Twitch. And honestly, you can pretty much look at any game you can think of and have a look at it. I've had someone ask me recently at a conference, what about Temple Run? Could I look at Temple Run as a game to study? And I was like, well, yeah, why not? Why not have a look at this game that was widely accessible, that if you break it down, you could, yeah. So there's a whole bunch of different things that you can look at within Archeogaming. So I've probably also left you guys with a lot of questions because I just wanted to run through this quickly. But I will let Danny have the screen now. So there we go.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for that, Ashley. Yeah, I can. I've managed to wing a little PowerPoint myself in a couple minutes here, so I'll share as well. Actually, no, I'm just going to share the screen because it'll be easier because I'm going to show a little bit of what I'm doing as well. I'm going to go really, really quickly through what I do. In essence, oh no, sorry, that's probably not the right move. Okay, let's share the PowerPoint instead. There we are. Can you folks see this, or should I needed to share prior, I think.
We are seeing a PowerPoint, now nothing.
Yeah, okay. Let me, I absolutely hate this. There we go. You should be able to see the PowerPoint itself, like the presentation and not my screen.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, cool. Awesome. So yeah, like I said, I'm Danny. I work on video game history. So I don't work on history in video games, but rather the history of video games. So of course, of the medium. I work through it through both like how do we study the history of it, but also how do we preserve them? Because of course, one and the other go together. And so, oh no, okay, sorry. That very quick PowerPoint presentation was a little bit, had a couple surprises. So basically, I start with the premise that video games are dying. That's a little bit of an overstatement, but still. I'm basing myself on what James Newman said in his pivotal work on game preservation called Best Before, where he says that video games are disappearing. And so I don't think that there's enough urgency in what he was saying, because even if he wrote his book in 2012, things have not been getting really that great. Still, there's a lot of what's happening in video game history, or what has happened in video game history, that's being lost through a lot of different things. So through bit rot, meaning just the degradation of the storage medium, for instance, or just of the bits, quite literally, that create games, video games, are degrading. Format obsolescence. So of course you have a different consoles that might not be working anymore. So like your Nintendo Entertainment System, NES, might not be functional anymore unless you've really kept it going and like have repaired it and stuff. But some of the consoles that came out even in the early 70s, like Xbox Odysseys, are probably not going to be usable anymore. And so, of course, because new stuff keeps coming out, there's a lot of planned obsolescence in here. Hardware failure, very much related, and then copy protection. Because if you want to be able to copy some games, you're going to have to go around it. And because of the copy protection that they put inside of games to try and prevent piracy, well, that also prevents us from saving them. But there's one thing that I kind of came up with, or not that I came up with, sorry, but that I realized the more I was doing research on this. And so after my master's, because my master was on video game preservation more specifically, I realized that there's a lack of historical methodology in the way we do video game history and in the way that video games are preserved. Now, some people have a good background and it's great, but a lot of them don't. And as much as they're doing amazing stuff, sometimes there's I have a couple critiques because I feel that it's not necessarily and there's not enough historical kind of mindset being promulgated in that work. So you see a lot of what I call great game history, meaning that a lot of focus on the big big stuff. Mario, everyone knows Mario, of course. Super Mario, great game, amazing. But again, if you're always going for these great games, you forget a lot of the smaller stuff that is sometimes even more impactful than some of these larger games. And it's kind of a recreation of the great men history that has happened in the past, of course, and still happens in some spheres. And so I want to kind of step away from that and push for more kind of minor histories and stuff like that. So yeah, so there's a lot of focus on video game canons, is kind of the same thing, not just on the industry itself and on creators, but on like big time series and of course commercial successes typically. So it's very kind of techno-industrial focused. And in terms of historians working on games, now a lot of good stuff is happening, especially in the history in games, so analyzing the history that's represented in games, but there's not so much happening for the history of games. It's mostly non-historians. And while they do bring a lot of very, very, very good literature, sometimes it's lacking in terms, as I said, of historical methodology. And so, one actually historian, so trained historian who works on the history of games, who has said that there's kind of a lack of interpretive edge and critical perspective in video game history, pretty much. So that would be Henry Lowood. And basically, what we see is very deterministic, teleological, centered on the industry and technology. Again, that's what I call the great game history. And so it marginalizes and excludes a lot of people, right? And excludes a lot of minor histories. For instance, Danny Button-Berry, who was a trans woman who created games. You have Jerry Lawson, who was the inventor of the video game cartridge, and it was a Black man, and for a very, very long time was kind of, passed under the rug, just kind of forgotten. And Muriel Tremy, who was if I remember correctly, she's from, is it Martinique? I believe so. I might be mixing Guadeloupe and Martinique. Anyway, so she was a game creator who moved to France and then created some amazing games talking about her own culture, about growing up and being from a previously a slave colony, and talking about all of that history, which is very, very, very interesting. But those people who are very important and pivotal sometimes, as Jerry Lawson, for instance, or even Danny Button-Berry, because she created a game that inspired the Civilization series, and her game was Seven Seas of Gold. They're not as known. Danny Button-Berry is fairly well known, but Jerry Lawson, it was only until the past couple of years, and Muriel Tremy, only some people know it. Like people who are interested in, for instance, women in gaming, especially in the history of video games. And so my research now is kind of trying to bridge a lot of what I did in my training in public history and what I do in game studies. And so I'm trying to develop a way to preserve and do the history of video games through oral history. So like in the way I want to do it is I want to try and have an oral history interview that would be structured in a way where people could play the games, talk about their memories, and have, actually having a physical console if possible, and try to have that to trigger the memories. So, having these conversations between the material and the immaterial, the emotions and the experience, trying to capture some of that. Because, you can always put a console or a game in a museum and it's just on a pedestal somewhere and no one can actually touch it behind a window or something. But, is that even preserving a game? Like, are you preserving a game if you're not even preserving, the fact that it should be played and can be played? Is kind of the mindset I've come up with. I have. And so yeah, interviews on like 3 parts where, you do a little bit of an intro, just talking the life story of the person, getting a little bit of background, then letting them play and commenting as they're playing. So a little bit looking like, a Twitch stream, for instance, or a Let's Play for those who know these. So the videos that people post online where they are playing the games that are commenting as they're playing very often. And then, then kind of a closing portion of an interview where people would just be talking. And that's my info. So that's pretty much my stuff and where I'm at right now. And I'm also coordinating the video game lab at the University of Montreal. I've spoken enough for now, so I won't bore you with more with pictures of the lab and stuff. However, a lot of what we do now is, it started originally as just a lab where people were able to play the games that they were working on. That was it. However, as time went on, because it's been around since the lab's been around since 2011, it quickly became apparent that if we wanted students to be able to play their games, we were going to have to do some preservation. And so the video game lab became very quickly more focused on history and on preservation as time went on. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I'm the coordinator now, because I'm trying to bring that kind of mindset a lot more entrenched in how the lab functions.
You already have a question, Danny and Ashley. It's from Hamish. I have a question for both of you. Why do you think your studies are important? I feel like video games are overlooked in their influence a lot, but I am interested to hear what you guys think is important about them. Ashley, you want to go first?
Yep, I'll jump in. I find a lot of, especially being of a, and I don't want to not call anyone out or anything, but especially being of a younger generation where I grew up with these games, it's a thing in my life that I've grown up with. I remember playing video games that had books with them that you'd go through to learn to read and go on this journey. That in that way, they've been something so inherent within my life. But I feel a lot of what I do is looking at what the game's representing, what knowledge is coming across to the wider public who's playing these games and accessing these games online through Let's Plays and streaming and stuff, and analyzing what historical knowledge they're getting, sorry, I have a cat screaming outside my door. Apologies if you can hear that. But yeah, like crossing that boundary of between the more traditional history in universities and such, and accessing what the general public, what history they're getting, seeing that, looking at it, and also, yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. And that, like, I being someone who has a training in public history, like studying the history in games, like that's exactly the same kind of mindset I would have, and why I think what you're doing is so great and important. In my case, why I think it's important, well, there's a couple of things. First, for people like Ashley who are studying history in games, eventually you're going to want to study games that have been made in the past, right? You're not always going to want to study the most like popular game, the latest version of Civilization. Someone is going to want to go through Civ 1 to Civ 6 and see everything that came out and how it evolved. And to do that, you're going to need preservation, and you're going to need to know the history of the medium itself. So where I position myself is, in order to do that historical research, we need archives, we need research on it, we need all of these things to be able to do that. The other reason why I think what I do is important, and because I do agree with your statement, Hamish, that video games are overlooked. Like film used to be overlooked for a very, very long time, until probably the early 1990s. I was like, oh no, it's not theater, it's not real art. And then lo and behold, of course it was. Well, same thing for video games. Do you have crappy games that just suck? Absolutely. Do you have barely any worth? Sure, maybe there's going to be plenty of those. Like there's plenty of blockbuster films that are just kind of right? And in video games, it seems like people are focusing a lot more on that, on being childish, on being like not actually something with any cultural worth. Where I think if you ask pretty much anyone like me or like Ashley, who grew up with video games or who enjoy video games, we can see that there's artistry in here. Like it's a mix of both art, of design, of literature with narrative. It's taking a lot of these different art forms and bringing it all together into one whole, and it became something so much so large and so vast and so difficult to study as well and to preserve. So that's kind of the reason why I'm doing this, is because it is a medium that inherently has a worth, like any medium, like any other forms of art or technology or whatever. But also because I feel like it's been overlooked for a very long time by some spheres, and that's slowly going away. But still, I mean, you still see the stuff about like, oh no, how will like VR affect the neuroplasticity of people's brains? And sure, could it have an impact? Like, I'm not saying it won't, but I feel there's a lot of like kind of moral panic a little bit in that, right? How it's bad for you, and we need to find how. And the reverse also exists, right? Like, it's so great and there's no issue with it, and there's some research on that as well, right?
I don't know if anybody of the audience has any question. I do. I have a question, but my question might be a little bit basic for Ashley and Danny, but I come from an area that I know nothing about video games, like nothing. So there was something that this question is for both of you, more for Ashley, but I also want to know Danny's take on it. Ashley, you mentioned that there was no need of being so accurate in video games, like the question of being accurate. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? I'm thinking about my training as a traditional historian that needs to follow the sources. So can you talk a little bit about that also, Danny?
So one of my favorite, or my least favorite game in terms of archaeo gaming that I've looked at is the 2018 Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which it was set in Mexico and contained a complete mishmash of Aztec, Incan, Mayan, some Olmec, everything thrown together, kind of little things saying, yes, this is part of this distinct culture, but everything was kind of thrown together. There's aspects of each, or primarily Aztec, Incan, and Mayan within the main storyline, all coming into play together. So aspects of the Aztec New Fire ceremony, the god Kukulkan has been misrepresented as a war-angry god hell-bent on the destruction of the world. However, it's also one of my favorite games for representation, which, bear with me a moment. It gets across at the end of the game, slight spoilers for anyone looking to play it, but the titular character, Lara Croft, as part of her story arc and the story arc within the game, ends up taking part in the New Fire, or the recreation of the New Fire ceremony, and accepts that she must be the one to die for the world to keep living. In a way that's accessible to an audience, this idea of the death is rebirth is presented, and this concept is gotten across in an understandable, digestible way without being so incredibly heavy, where people need to go and research and take time to sit and figure it out and be like, well, this goes against a lot of our Western beliefs, that life, death is cyclical. So it's very much the culmination of this story that Lara, in her Western upbringing, her Western training, historical, archaeological training, can then accept that this is what must happen for the world to not die. I don't fully understand this, but I know that I must do this. And then you fully believe that Lara has died at the end of the game. It was presented as the last game in this trilogy. And then it cuts to a few months later, Lara being happy and everything working out in life for her. And it's like, well, wait, didn't we see her get stabbed by a giant, like, sacrificial knife? That's one of my favorite things, that where I can kind of accept that the accuracy isn't 100% there to get across a deeper understanding that in a way is still accurate.
Yeah, actually, your point is great, because it brings up kind of where I stand on these issues of like historical kind of accuracy versus historical authenticity. And I feel for me, and that's a thing actually that I do use in my own research about like what should we preserve? Should we go for like exactly accurate, or should we go for more authentic, right? Because when you're playing a video game, for instance, what is important? Is it important that you're playing it exactly as it was, or is it just that it's functional, right? Like you're not going to be able to have a functional version forever. So rather have something that's kind of as close as possible, right? And so that notion of accuracy and authenticity, and I actually based myself on how David, who's here in the room, hi David, kind of defines it in one of his articles of like, what is kind of like accurate, like a kind of a, is it exact versus does it feel right, right? And I feel like honestly, this notion of authenticity, especially when we're talking about video games, is a lot more important than if we go for accuracy constantly. Oh no, they didn't get like the right color or whatever. Like, sure, okay, these historical details can be important sometimes. But if you're only focusing on that, you'll be just completely overlooking all the possibilities and all the worth and all the wealth of stuff you can do with video games and historical video games more generally. So I feel like we have to stop being the kind of well actually person, which sometimes it's important, right? But again, we also have to be conscious that you're adapting history, you're adapting like complex historical and cultural, cultural practices into a new medium, into a video game. It's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. If it communicates something that's still authentic and still gets the gist of it, that's fine. And then we can debate about how, was it done correctly? Was it done not correctly? Could have been better, whatever, of course. Now there's a lot of space for that. But yes, so my take is more, go for something authentic, something that feels and has more impact than just going for the more accurate. Because like if we're just going for accuracy, Call of Duty and like their exact replicas of guns, then that's accuracy. And to me, that's not worth it. Like, okay, cool, it's nice. Is it actually bringing anything? No, it's just like the people who like really, really like war games are going to be like, oh yes, whatever detail, like that's fine. But that's like, the dad who watches the History Channel and like really likes the 25 different types of tanks. Like, sure, it's interesting, but there's more to that.
You still, I think, need something to draw people in. You need that, the entertainment, the fun, you need something to draw people in, just like you do with any sort of history. You want something that will catch attention and pull people in. Like in terms of museum exhibits, there might be a way to completely amazingly represent all of the history and artifacts in a way that on paper is great, but is it going to draw an audience in? It's that same kind of issue thing that is across a lot of histories and a lot of public history as well.
Okay, thank you. Those were great answers. We have two questions. One from David. It's a question comment. David Dean. Hi, David. I often wonder if users are getting a sense of the past, experiencing lives once lived through play, rather than engaging with the writing of history through video games. If that's right, then it seems that the history of games is vital. Do you want me to read the other one first, or first you answer, David, and then we go to another one? The other one is from Danielle Mahone.
We can always answer David, but I think Milena also had a question right before that, if I'm not. Or maybe was it just a comment?
Oh, Malena, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm going to read all the questions. Okay, Malena, I'm sorry I skipped you. I would be interested to know how they work with difficult or trauma stories in a video game that works with oral histories. I'm thinking maybe about the ethical issue, for example. And the other question I have is the issue of accessibility to these video games in different contexts. Not everyone has access to these technologies. Have you thought of any strategies for that? I'm thinking especially about minority memories. And I'm going to read Danielle's, what are your thoughts on video games as a pedagogical tool for teaching historical methods and critical thinking? And is there a way to use video games as a teaching tool to educate users about the history of video games? So those questions are in the chat. So maybe we can start with Malena, so we can go in order. Thank you.
I can take a jab at it. So yeah, so like difficult histories or like trauma stories in history that work with oral history, and if I understand correctly, just how they might be represented in games themselves. That's a really interesting things, and there are some games that do touch on that. This War of Mine is probably one of the most known ones. I haven't played it, but I hear amazing things about it. But you're basically playing civilians during wartime, and you're trying to survive. So you're talking about how it is to live through war, and not as a soldier, contrary to most of video games, right? Kind of seeing the other side of the coin. And that's really, really interesting. Now, I'm not sure how they built the game. Did they use oral histories or something? Perhaps, I'm not sure. But I know of some games, for instance, that are set in some indigenous communities. For instance, in was it Alaska? I don't remember the name of the game. I'd have to look it up. But they did make them in collaboration with elders and just talking about the culture and stuff, and kind of using these oral histories, of course, and these oral traditions to build to build the games. So yes, absolutely, there is a place for that, and I think it's a place for very, very powerful narratives and very, very powerful communication of of history, of different cultures, and I think there's a lot of space for that. And video games is a great medium for that. And I feel for feeling these emotions, because when you're playing, you're feeling emotions. Would it be stress? Would it be elation? There's plenty of games that I've played that a couple of games that I literally just cried because it was so touching, right? Like all of these emotions. It's not just about killing people. Like I know most people here agree, but I just need to restate that. And for the second portion of this of the question, so yes, of course, not everyone has access to these technologies, and I think a good example of that is why you see a lot of people going through like Twitch streaming, through Let's Plays on YouTube, where you don't necessarily have to play the game itself. You can actually watch other people do it. And when you're going on Twitch, for instance, people are commenting. There's a whole kind of community thing. And to me, it's so reminiscent of like me and my friends. And I know like everyone who grew up with video games has a similar story of like one friend has that one game, or one friend has one console and the other one has the other. And so we go to each other's places and play together. Someone is playing a single player game, but the other people are on the couch and kind of participating in that. And so that kind of communal type of gaming is available online through that. So that's one of the ways. Another way, for instance, is like one of the projects I'm working on, and it kind of related to what I'm doing as well, is recording playthroughs of games, right? And it's again similar to Let's Plays, or what some people do are called long plays, meaning just playing a game in its entirety, not necessarily with comments, because Let's Plays are more about performance. Because a lot of the people who do Let's Plays will be, they'll be fun, they'll make jokes or whatever, and they'll interact with the community that is this kind of that's who's watching the video, right? Or the broadcast, I should say. So I think that's one of the ways you can do it. Of course, there's many other ways, and I'm sure there might be some better ways or more accessible ways. But yeah, and just trying to democratize a lot of the console, a lot of consoles, a lot of the games that could be played. Now, there's a lot of issues with copyright, and I don't want to get too much into that, but like copyright is a real problem, especially because for books, for instance, or even for some movies, you can rent them. You can just go to the library, for instance, and borrow it and play it. And some libraries do have video games, interestingly. So maybe that's one of the good ways you could do that. But in terms of like, minority memories, there's a great project that's ongoing. I'm not sure how exactly it's going, but I know it was happening, but COVID kind of threw a wrench in that. I think it was at UCLA Long Beach, where some historians there, I forget their name, wanted to go into kind of poor neighborhoods, minority neighborhoods, and interview people about their experience playing games, because that's very often some of the stuff you won't see, even in the broadcast where you have Twitch and all that stuff. It's going to talk to these people who also grew up with video games but have a different experience. And I think that's something that could be reproduced pretty much everywhere, because every country has their own version of it. You know, the experience in Brazil, for instance, is not going to be the same. It's going to be a lot closer to stuff that came out in Japan. Or, you know, I was in Berlin this summer, and at the Computerspiele Museum, there's a whole section about games that were made in the GDR. Again, a different experience. And that's one of the, actually, that brings in some of the criticism I have of what's being done in video game history, or at least until very recently, which focused on the US and Japan. And that was pretty much a little bit about what was happening in Europe. But then, like, that was it, right? It was talking about the big shots, the States and Japan mostly.
Yeah, I think just jumping back to, I'm going to go back to the first part of your question, the difficult or trauma stories in a video game. One of the games that jumps to mind instantly is Far Cry 6, which was released, I believe, 2021, and focuses on the game's set on a fictional Caribbean island of Yara, ruled by as a dictatorship by a president who you're actively trying to break down his regime throughout the game. As soon as you open the game, before you can even start playing, it instantly pops up with a disclaimer saying that this game has confronting themes. They're not hiding the truth there, or I say truth, but they're not hiding these brutalities that have happened all around the world. They're not presenting it in a way that is nice and happy to be packaged and sent out into mass media. The game starts with you escaping your city, just straight fleeing, like people that your character has grown up with die at the start. You get this brutality straight in, and nothing is hidden in the game, and it keeps it, even though it's a fictional world, and that you get to run around and get giant guns and befriend a crocodile that helps you take down people, it still keeps it very real and very present, and you don't lose this disconnect of things that, yeah, I find the game incredibly, they could have easily hidden it. They could have easily swept it under a rug, made it nice and pretty, made bodies at the end of a fight disappear, but they haven't. They've left this brutality, the dictatorship, they've left it very much intact, that you're trying to break down. You can go traveling along looking for lost relics, and you come across a dock with a pile of bodies that, even though it's not related to the storyline, it's still there. It still keeps this overarching narrative, this present. But the need for disclaimers and stuff is something that's, I find, very important within these games, because you can often, one of the great things about gaming is the immersion within it. You can very much lose yourself for hours or days within a game. It's more for people that haven't really played video games, it's not just a movie, because you're sitting there, you're making the choices yourself, you're using a controller and running around, you have specific objectives you have to try and do. You can very, very easily lose yourself in a game the way that you lose yourself in a amazing piece of movie or TV or a book or something. But yeah, the need to, I appreciate the games that do keep the realities of things in, while still having a playable and, at the end of the day, memorable game, that this narrative of Yara and the fictional island will still stay within people, and they'll still, without realizing, pick up things and be able to sympathize and empathize a bit more with people who have unfortunately experienced these things. Hopefully that answers part of that, and I haven't just gone completely on another tangent. In terms of accessibility, it's definitely, as Danny said, streaming, YouTube, Twitch are absolutely amazing at getting these things out. So you can get onto YouTube and look up anything with a device, even if you don't have a phone that has this capability. And this may be from a Australian Western perspective. Most libraries around are free to use. You can go in, you can jump on a computer, you can watch these things. Within me personally as well, with accessibility, as you mentioned, I do have disabilities. There are ways that I can make these games playable for me, and there's also games that I just can't play because it will set off something and it doesn't make it safe for me. As well, there's been times where I haven't physically been able to play games. So one of my favorite games, God of War, the 2018 release, at the time of its release, I was too sick to even get out of bed. I was seeing doctors and specialists multiple times a week. It would take me half an hour to get, with my mom's help, to get off the lounge. And I remember a particular streamer, Jacksepticeye, he was releasing a 2-hour segment of God of War each day with its release. And it was I lost about a month of my life that I don't remember from these doctor's appointments and how sick I was and the millions of medications I was on. But what I do remember from that time is sitting and watching this game and watching him play through this game. And it would take me all day to get through this 2-hour video because I would keep falling asleep because my body would just shut down. But I would go back and rewind it and watch it. And that was all I remember of that time. And even for somebody that plays games nonstop pretty much, it's that memory of sitting and interacting with this game in the way that I could, in the way that leaves such a memory on me that this game will have a stronger reaction and memory within me than it will for most people. But yeah, I think that's the accessibility of games. There's so much that gaming can do, and that's why I love looking at what these games are telling us. What are people absorbing when they're too sick to pick a movie? They just go on YouTube, pick the first thing that shows up. What are people getting? How are people interacting with these things? So yeah, hopefully that answers it.
Thank you. Do you want to go on with David's question? Should I read it again, or you remember?
If you could repeat it just so everyone is
Yes.
remembers.
So, okay. David Dean, I often wonder if users are getting a sense of the past, experiencing lives once lived through play, rather than engaging with the writing of history through video games. If that's right, then it seems that the history of games the history of history games is vital.
You're preaching to the choir here, David. It was pretty much my point, right? Like it actually, so just to give you context, like me and Ashley kind of made lists of questions that we would ask one another, and like all of these questions that I've prepared are showing up. So thank you very, very much. I don't have to read them. It's actually much easier this way. But no, absolutely. Like there's this one thing, for instance, when people think about like historical video games, we also have to think like what research was done, what type of history is it? Was it a company who was just like, yeah, let's just go on Wikipedia and that's going to be our research? Or was it like Ubisoft, who has an actual historian working on it? Now, how that history is actually used in the game, now that's a different thing. So like I'm not criticizing necessarily I don't remember his name, sadly, but anyway, I'm not criticizing his work specifically, but sometimes when you're creating a game, you're going to have to adapt stuff a little bit. And so yes, actually see like these different types of games, how they do different things, how they talk about some different different subjects. Like when you were talking actually earlier about like Far Cry and like talking about, you know, I guess Civil War, or like, well, in that case, I haven't played it, so I'm not sure, kind of genocide and stuff. You know, there's a great article that was published in International Public History, translated from originally a German article about representations of the Holocaust in video games. It's written by Felix Zimmerman and, oh God, is it Thor? Is it Thor? No. Oh, I forget the second author. Maybe we can find it and send in the right in the chat. I'll find it when I'm done talking, and I'll send the link. But yeah, it's a great article about talking about, like, how was it represented in film, and how it was said to be irrepresentable in film, and how it was done either correctly or really badly in different ways, and kind of the same thing happening with games. And of course, games have their specificity, because they do talk about one of the Wolfenstein games where you do actually end up seeing a camp and you are in a camp, but it's a first-person shooter where you're playing this hero who's pretty much just like mowing through enemies. So like there's this one moment where you can't control your character. You can just look around and you're just moving forward until the point, and you can see and hear stuff that's happening in the camp. And then when you're brought in this one place, someone drops like a knife for you, and then you manage to escape, and then you go back to like killing people and being this like superhuman, right? So there's interesting discussions here about what's happening, and how they represented it. But I'm sure there are ways to represent these difficult histories. Now, was that a good way to do it? I don't know. That's not my wheelhouse. So I'll let people who are more well versed in those topics to talk about it. But there is definitely a way to do it. Now, where that lies, that's a different story. But yeah, no, definitely, like the history of history games is something that has actually, I've been thinking about doing that after I'm done with what I'm doing right now. That would be a very, very, very interesting a book or volume for a lot of historians working on history in games, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a question that's more up Danny's field or Danny's area of expertise. But yeah, I find that there's a bit of a in between, as we were saying, the accuracy versus authenticity and the experience of the game. As awesome as it would be to have a game that completely represents, say, medieval London, where you can walk through the market, go do all the daily activities as a historian, that would be an incredibly awesome game to me, that it represents it. But there's nothing about that particularly that draws me in, that keeps me going back. There's kind of missing that element of that connection. So I think definitely the history of history games is important, and how it'll be interesting to look at how that in between is navigated, portraying the accuracy while still giving the authenticity, but also drawing in an audience to make the game playable. But then do you have a middle ground where you go, okay, I'm going to bring down the accuracy and authenticity in order to add more things in, like the Wolfenstein game, where you go in and attempt to wipe out the camp, and then just kind of leave, and like, yep, cool, that's included in the game, but are you really interacting with that history in a way that's accurate? But yeah, so that in between of but selling the game, getting this out to a wider audience, or do you create a game that's incredibly authentic, that is marketed to a very narrow group of people? That in between, that interests me, how developers make that decision, what their intentions are behind the game. Obviously, big companies like Ubisoft, etc., they want to get these games out to as many people as possible. But a lot of more indie developers, that's not necessarily their intentions. They want to more tell the story or the experience rather than out for the profits. So yeah, I think it's incredibly interesting, and the history of history games is something that will keep evolving, and yeah, it'll be incredibly interesting to see.
Thank you both. Let's go to Danielle's question. Hi, Danielle. What are your thoughts on video games as a pedagogical tool for teaching historical methods and critical thinking? And is there a way to use video games as a teaching tool to educate users about the history of video games?
You want me to start the ball?
If you want, yep.
Sure. Okay, I'll go. So yeah, I do think that history games can be used for that. Absolutely. There is some great research being done on that. Specifically, actually, there's a lot. I know a bunch of European or French European scholars working on that. There's Samuel McReady, who's at York, I think, or he just graduated anyway, and was working at Carleton for a while, who was also working on something similar, kind of teaching him history through Fallout, since you're playing this post-apocalyptic world, but then you can go into museums and you can see what happened in the past, right? Through the game as it's happening. It's quite interesting. So there is definitely a way. And even if it's just like, here's a game that does it badly, and then using that as a tool to then kind of analyze and critically think about history and representations of history, that's great, right? And I think like that's something that's not unseen anyway. Like how many people have seen in their history classes a film that's been shown just to depict something, and then we're going to analyze it, and then we'll see, oh, you know, this is done well, but not necessarily great, and here's a bit more details and stuff, just like kind of as a stepping stone, right, to do something in greater depth. And that's incredibly important as well, because a lot of people now, like, their first interaction with history is through video games, or it's just through popular culture more generally, right? I know of many people who became interested in studying history by just being drawn in by video games, and then like, oh, I like the history in here, and then decided to make a career out of it, right? Like, not everyone's going to have that experience, of course, but still, it is an experience that's going to happen, and especially with, you know, younger generations than even mine. Like, I'm in my 30s, so like people who are younger than me will have even more that experience, because, you know, even I had video games, like when I was, my first video game console, I got it at 4 years old, right? So, you know, that is something, it's a medium that's always been around for me in my life in one way or another. So yes, I do think they can be used as pedagogical tools. How they're used now, that becomes the interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anyone knows it, but there's a lot of people trying to try and analyze that. So that's great. And then what's the second part of the question? Is there a way to use video games as teaching tools to educate users about the history of video games? I mean, sure. I'm going to be teaching a video game history class next semester, so I'm knee deep trying to do that. So I think there's probably ways of doing it. I'm actually trying to discover them. I know more people. I can't really answer that, you know, in detail. I mean, playing games, I think, would be probably one of the best ways, right? Playing old games, because the experience is not the same. I have plenty of experience of, you know, trying to understand the history of an old game and then playing an original version, and then being like, oh, okay, that's what they meant, by using like original controllers. For instance, playing a game called Joust that was originally released on, it's an arcade game, and I had played plenty of versions, emulated versions on a computer, an NES version, an Atari version, and then eventually played the original one on an arcade, and it was completely different. And I understood so much more what I had read about that game when I played the original. So yes, I do think that's definitely one of the ways that should go forward if we're talking about using games as teaching tools to talk about the history of games.
I think definitely, just jumping on that, using games as a teaching tool, definitely, like, there's so many different avenues that you can do. And I think a lot of it, events like this, where we're bridging the gap between people who may not have ever encountered video games personally, that we're now discussing, hey, here's all the ways that they can be helpful, that they can be used to help educate, help enlighten, help spread the awareness of public history and things like that, is ways that we are helping to educate users about these things. As well, like, in, like, one thing, it's in the fourth Uncharted game, which was by Naughty Dog, which I think was released in 2016. In the game, there's a section where you go back and you play as the character in the game, Crash Bandicoot, which was released in the 90s. The controls are completely different. Even though you're playing the same game using the same controller, the control system changes, the ways you move change. I've played Uncharted a million times. I can play it like without even really paying attention. I cannot get through that part in Crash Bandicoot. As a kid, I was that little bit too young for Crash Bandicoot. But in saying that, I watched my older siblings sit and play Crash Bandicoot. I'd get the control for 2 seconds, then it'd be taken back off me. But it was still that, like, I cannot do that thing. And like, even just in that within a game, a big game recently released that was like massively marketed and everything, that it's still going back and showing Naughty Dog, the company, their history and what they started out making. That even things like that I love. And like, we also get things like emulators that can give people a semblance of the experience. So games that you can't really play anymore because of changing technologies, the technologies we don't really have or aren't easily accessible. There's ways that you can boot them up on a computer or something to have some of that experience to play through these games. Things like that. Yeah, I love that kind of thing, that it's not just you need to be there to have lived it. You can see all these games on YouTube as well and on Twitch, that there's still people playing. Yeah, but definitely games as a tool for teaching historical methods and critical thinking all over, I love. It's a lot of what I do, looking at it and seeing, what do we do? What are people getting out of it? What knowledge are people getting? And even myself as a historian and archaeologist, I go into all games, even though I know they have a strong history focus. I go in knowing, I don't go in researching things. I go in, I want to play the game. I want to experience the game. And then I go back and look, or there might be something in game that triggers me going, hey, is that actually a thing? Is that like actually what the truth is, or the history is, or has it been done to draw an audience in? That, yeah, I think there's definitely ways. And from even Assassin's Creed Valhalla with 1.8 million players within the first week, even that many people that didn't, like, there's probably maybe 50% of that have finished the game, that they'd still walk away with more knowledge about that historical period, the historical events of, when was it, 880 to 890 Anglo-Saxon England, following Norse Viking settlers coming in, and wars or fighting political power between the four regions of Anglo-Saxon England. So a lot of that, people walk away knowing that even just, oh, hey, there was 4 different political groups, like regions within Anglo-Saxon England. It wasn't just always England. That you get a lot of these things just passively by playing, that I love it. It's, and yeah.
Thank you. There's a comment from Amy. I'm going to read it. Thank you, Amy. These are great points. Makes me think too beyond some of the big name and indie games we have discussed about the importance of video games, Minecraft, Roblox, as cultural artifacts of the history of childhood, or mobile popular gaming as a core part of everyday history. Remember Animal Crossing at the start of the pandemic?
Okay, if I can jump on that, like just that comment about Animal Crossing. First of all, I didn't play it. Animal Crossing is not my type of game. Grinding is not my thing. However, do I know so many people who have played that game? Oh my God. Also, if you did not know, then the National Video Game Museum in the UK actually has an entire research project on specifically that. And it's called the Animal Crossing Diaries. And they were asking people to submit their stories, screenshots, video playthroughs, recording any Let's Play that they've done. And they're actually doing in-depth oral history interviews now as part of that project. It is absolutely amazing. And it's definitely one of the projects that I'm inspiring. I'm taking inspiration from to do my own research because I think it's absolutely great. So yes, the Animal Crossing Diaries is so fascinating and interesting. But yes, you're right. Like with the everyday popular gaming, kind of the mobile gaming. So yes, like we know most games that are played on like mobiles and stuff. Everyone has games on their phones now, or anyone who has access to a smartphone, for instance, can have games or has games, right? It's also one of the big issues when it comes to video game history and just in gaming more generally, because there was for a very, very long time, and there's still some factions in gaming who say that mobile gaming is not real gaming. I think they're a bunch of dicks, and yes, you can quote me on that. And I'm not gonna use like more proper language. I think they're a bunch of dicks. So like, and there was even some debate about what people called walking simulators, about games that are very narrative driven, where you don't kill stuff. You're literally just walking through and following a narrative, discovering items, listening to audio pieces, reading things. And so it's all about the experience and all about discovering the history or the story, the narrative that's been displayed in that game. Some people were criticizing it because what it wanted to do is kill monsters and shoot stuff. If you want games to kill monsters and shoot stuff, that's fine. I'm a huge Dark Souls fan. That's what I do. I just play difficult games and like almost flip my computer desk because I'm frustrated because they're hard as hell. But these narrative games are also games, and you're playing like Bejeweled or whatever, or like Candy Crush. Those are also games. Those are also very important in people's lives, right? Now, are they kind of mindless sometimes? Sure. Are they just time wasters? Sure. Does it really matter? No. What do you think I'm doing when I'm playing a video game? I'm pretty much just, yes, it's a passion of mine, but I'm also kind of wasting my time at the very same time. It's the same thing. Those are not mutually exclusive, right? They can both be art and also be kind of a waste of time sometimes. It's totally fine. But yeah, no, absolutely. It's really, really important to do that. And like Minecraft has been used in so many ways. It's being used in classrooms now to teach a lot of different things. And just to give you an example, in one professor I had when I was still doing my I was taking classes during my PhD, so before I was done my classes, told us about this one thing that he did when the pandemic hit and we still had to teach remotely, is that he had an entire class in Minecraft, and students had to build stuff, had to people made desks and stuff and like could have their little things, and it was just a great experience. And a lot of people actually spent a lot more hours creating this whole thing, participating that in Minecraft, than if they had been in class and if they had been sitting down and trying to just listen and stuff. It's absolutely great, totally great. I think like there's a lot in there that just is right for the taking, right for analysis, and we should definitely dig deep into that for sure. And there's some stuff being done on that, but definitely more.
Yeah, there's definitely like a lot of the like games as cultural artifacts. Like I'm sure Animal Crossing at the start of the pandemic, definitely a big one. I didn't have Animal Crossing then. That was when it was almost impossible in Australia to get a Switch because everywhere was sold out. You couldn't go out anywhere to look for things. But I have a group chat on Twitter of people from all around the world that I met through video game streaming from Twitch, that in this chat there's maybe at most out of the 40 or 50 of us, maybe 4 or 5 people that live within LA as a like greater LA, and that's like the closest that we get to being near each other. I think I'm the only one in Australia, or there might be one other guy. But in this group, we were going through and dropping things of, here's my island code, here's this, what are your turnip prices today? Which, if you're familiar with Animal Crossing, this will be like, oh, I remember those days. If you're not, turnips were like the stock market. So and every different person would have a different turnip price on a different day. So you go and try and buy them at someone's island for the cheapest price possible, stock up a bunch, and then sell them for the most that you could. So there'd be people going, like giant chains of people going to one person's island because they were selling turnips for 140 bells, which is the in-game currency, and another person's island would be someone was buying them for 600 or 700 bells. So it'd be this giant chain of people all around the world trying to get the most money that they could possible in this game while we were all locked in houses and couldn't leave. It was a way that we definitely like connected with people. It was, yeah. And then like games like Minecraft, I remember pulling Minecraft up for my nephew, and within an hour or two of me not even explaining the controls, I just went, yep, here you go, entertain yourself. He created this giant thing and gotten further in the game than I had. And I was like, well, and like I remember the name of the game that I mentioned before that I learned, or that I didn't learn to read on, but it was a game that I'd sit and read the books with the character, was it Reader Rabbit, which will probably unlock some memories for some maybe 80s, 90s people, as well as later games like kindergarten, first grade and stuff, which you'd go through and learn different things. Like there was a thing where you could learn Braille in game to answer questions and stuff, that things like that I learned as a kid that I played. And then like there's all of these games that you see as big cultural things that unite people. Like there's so many games. Like you can, this new release of a big game, that's all that's going to be on YouTube or on Twitch. You're going to have, so what would it be? So the coming out soon is God of War Ragnarok, which is highly anticipated. I think it was supposed to come out at the end of 2020, but due to the pandemic got pushed back and various things. It's now coming out 2 years later, and I wouldn't be surprised if there would be probably 60 to 70,000 people watching various different streams on Twitch alone, let alone people uploading videos on YouTube that within 3-4 days could get 8 million views, easy. That there's all of these people interacting with this game, even if they might not be going out and playing the game, they might not have the software to play the game, it might not be a game that they want to play it. They might put on a gaming stream in the background while cleaning, or a lot of the time I'll chuck on a gaming stream while I'm cooking or while I'm doing uni work, or even going to sleep half the time if my brain won't turn off. I'll chuck on a gaming stream of some cozy game like Animal Crossing or Stardew Valley, or recently a new one similar to Animal Crossing, Stardew Valley and Pokemon is Ooblets, which has its own language and everything in game. That all of these things, that they're definitely cultural things, and yeah, you interact with people, you connect with people with this game. Even Ooblets that I just mentioned, that is this fun little game. I said to one of my housemates, oh, I think you'd really like this game. She downloaded it, bought it, it's been played nonstop. One of my other housemates, her partner, saw the game and was like, oh my God, yes, this looks so much fun. So I can guarantee you in a few weeks when uni's finished and I have more time, I will be sitting on my Switch playing Ooblets while she's sitting on her Switch playing Ooblets, and somebody's playing Ooblets on the TV. That even though we're all in the same house, in the same lounge room, we're all going to be individually playing this game, this single player game, but playing it together. So I think, yeah, there's all of these different ways that gaming connects people, and it's a cultural thing that pretty much everyone in my generation can go, oh yeah, I've played a game, even if it's just Candy Crush or Temple Run, which, yeah. I just saw Danny go, yes, Temple Run. Like these games that you forget about because it was just, and like games like Doodle Jump, where you were this tiny little alien just jumping and you had to tilt your phone to not die. I remember being in like woodworking class in school playing this game. Like, they're ways that are gonna unite people, and you can easily chat to someone and go, oh wait, yeah, I played that game, I know that game, and you can connect with people based on that, which, yeah, I find it really interesting. And I'm going to stop talking now before I keep ranting.
Thank you, Ashley. I have a question for Danny, but also Ashley, if you want to jump in, more than welcome. Like you mentioned, Danny, that you were going to teach, and I was wondering, how are you going to teach that class?
How I'm going to teach that class?
Yeah, I mean, yes. What are you going to teach? Actually, what
Oh,
I mean, I'm
okay.
curious
Yeah.
to know how you're going to approach the topic for a class.
Sure. So just a little bit of context. So at University of Montreal, we do have a minor, a major, and a master's in game studies. So it's in film studies, but then it's like an option for game studies, because at UDM that's how it works. It's through film studies. And so basically, I will be recently when we added the I think it's a year or two ago, right before the pandemic, actually. Now I remember. We've added the major, and so now we have 2 history of video game classes. So beforehand it was just only 1, and yeah, for like a 60-year history of like talking about technology and stuff, it's a lot. So they split them in 2, and I'm going to be teaching the second half, which is 1990s to today, which is literally me. I was born in 1990, and so it's exactly my generation, right? And so how I'm going to be teaching it. So I have some restrictions when it comes to theme. I think they're kind of, they're due to a previous mindset that, you know, when you're talking about video games, we're talking a lot about technology. And of course, our program is also kind of hybrid between game studies and game development. So we do have to talk a little bit about like the history of technology and video games, which is less my focus. I'm more of a kind of cultural historian, right? Social historian. And so I have to bring in both, which is interesting and necessary anyway, because you do have both of these things happening at the same time, right? So just to give you an example, for instance, one of the first like actual classes that we're going to have is going to be just like the war. It's just it's entitled, and I'm translating it. It's like the war on myths, the myths in video games. So for instance, for a very long time, you had this myth that the more bits you have, so like 8-bit, 16-bit, 64-bit, that was what was like the best thing. The more bits there are, the better it is. And so that's not actually true, because you had some consoles that came out around the same time as 16-bit consoles and were actually 8-bit consoles that were doing better things or you know, doing things differently to do kind of exactly the same thing. But you can see that culture kind of coming up both in the industry a little bit, but also in video game journalism, where they're really sticking on the 16-bit generation and like, oh yes, this is exactly it, and that becomes kind of the standard. And of course, what happens in the video game press makes its way, well, it's both influenced by the community, but also makes its way back into the community, right? And how these two things kind of interact with one another, and how that shapes, of course, what's happening more today, where like, you know, games are coming out, and what are we doing? We're talking about like high-res graphics. We're talking about how you know, powerful, how fast the loading times, and all these things are kind of there, right? And so you see that throughout the history of video games, but it really picks up in the early 1990s, like late 80s or early 1990s. And so like that's some of the stuff that I'll be talking about. But of course, I want to talk also about like the association of, you know, violence in video games, especially when you had like these whole kind of political debates of like, oh no, we can't have people playing violent video games because they're going to become violent themselves, right? Which, you know, if that was the case, I'd be the best example of that, because like I listen to extreme music, play violent video games. Most of the medium I consume is violent in one way or another. And I think for those who know me personally, I'm the furthest thing from that. Like I just got an Adventure Time tattoo and I almost cried because I liked it so much, right? Like I literally.
I saw it.
But stuff like that, right? All of these different things, and one of the there's, I want to close with like one last example of that class that I really want to talk about and to mention is one of my classes is going to be like I want to entitle it the second sex in video games, girl gaming, girl power, and Gamergate, because it's so important to talk about that, right? Video games are great. We've been talking about how great they are. But there's also the bad sides of it, right? And we cannot just talk about them and say like how great they are without actually addressing some of the shitty side of it, right? Gamergate, for those who don't know, early 2010s, pretty much was this huge kind of conspiracy thing about like, I might be misremembering some of the details, but it was about game development and the game journalism, where, if I remember correctly, someone was accused, this couple broke up, and then the man accused his now ex-partner of only getting jobs or getting the success she had by sleeping with people, pretty much. And so that became a huge thing because people were starting to address it. Of course, a lot of feminist game scholars, a lot of people, a lot of women in games were talking about the toxicity within the gaming community and the gaming industry. And there was a huge backlash by these people who called it Gamergate, right? Oh no, like the feminists are taking over games and all that stuff. For those who know Anita Sarkeesian, that's someone that was really targeted during that time. She did some pretty interesting videos on video games and representations of women, for instance, called and feminist frequencies, and even the Canadian Game Studies, which I'm on the executive for. We were targeted for that because we were talking about Gamergate, and someone sadly, like, that kind of like subtle code word that we were going to use to talk about it was leaked by a simple mistake on Twitter. And then, of course, we got, porn was sent on our Twitter feed and all that stuff. It got pretty bad. And interestingly, the Gamergate people are not gone. They're still there. They moved on to Trump. In 2016, they moved on to support Trump. And so, like, the neo-fascists we're seeing now, the alt-right, that's there, right? So when you're talking about the history of video games and Gamergate, it has so much greater implications than just video games, right? So yeah, that's the kind of like areas I'm going with and trying to build in and kind of bring into that class. I was already doing a little bit of that for sure, and actually in some instances a lot of that. Historical representation even is one of the classes I'm going to be talking about as well. But yeah, just trying to bring in that more kind of merging a little bit of the technology, maybe spending a lot less time on that just because of my specialization, but I do have to talk about it, not just because my department wants me to, but also because it is important, because it does talk about the culture of video games and how technology and culture are one in a way.
Thank you, Danny. Ashley, do you want to say something about teaching video games?
I would love to. In saying that, I haven't been lucky enough to have the opportunity to teach yet, but one of the like pipe dream things in my head, I would love to run a class looking at not only just gaming, but representation of more specifically ancient history, some more modern histories as well, but ancient history is usually more my focus, looking at representations within popular culture and where things are okay, where things aren't, and ask students individually to look at it and how they've interacted personally. So even in books like the Percy Jackson series, interacting with Greek history and Greek mythology, to all of a whole bunch of the games we've talked about today, to movies like Lord of the Rings, and bringing in concepts of medievalism and stuff. All of those different things that we now interact within everyday society, and we don't really realize that we're doing it, kind of highlighting these things as well. But yeah, so I think a lot of what I'd love to do going forward is just looking at a lot of these games, usually more, and I'm probably falling into the great game theory a little bit, looking at these big popular games and seeing what the wider public is getting out of it, how accurate is it, the authenticity and stuff, as we've gone on about multiple times. But then how as historians we can use these games and this knowledge that these audiences now have to further things and to draw people in. Like I know there's a game coming out soon using some of the engines or so engines is what the game is usually, or a game is created on. So somebody's used a lot of the engines and the raw data and stuff from Assassin's Creed Valhalla to make a more Norse settlement life simulator to be a more historical representation of this, but using this environment and these features and stuff that a giant audience is already familiar with. So you're probably going to get more people than if you just said, hey, here's a Norse simulator, getting these people in going, oh, I know this. Oh, actually, how similar is it? And the development of the game has been retweeted, I think, by Ubisoft or one of the various Assassin's Creed larger pages on Twitter, which is how I found out about it, just scrolling down on Twitter. There's as well in the US, the Save Ancient Studies Alliance. They do a lot of cool things, looking at archaeogaming, different games involved. They've got a whole bunch of things coming up as well that there's something new every week, and it's incredibly interesting to see how they put things in. And yeah, I think they also had some internships going if anyone was interested, but I looked at it and I was like, I do not have time for any more things. But yeah, like there's so many different areas that you can go into with this that, yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. And I think a lot of what both Danny and I are going to have to do will be bridging the gap between more traditional historians to going, hey, look at this shiny thing that's, for a lot of my life at least, it was always, oh, she's playing video games again. Oh, there's and I'm like, and I'm now going, but look, I can learn something from this, like see all of the things that this is telling us about today, and even historical things that I wouldn't have known without playing these games. So yeah, I think we're definitely going to see everything grow more, and it's going to be so cool.
Listen, I can only imagine how it would have been if someone from if myself from the future would have told my mom, do you know that your kid is going to make a career out of studying video games? She would have laughed. Definitely. Yep. 100%.
Yeah,
like, oh no, he's just wasting his time. He's addicted. He's playing so many games. Oh my God, it's that for him. Look at me now.
Yeah. The amounts of time I spent, the amount of money I've spent on games, like I'm going to slightly out myself here. I am a big Sims gamer. Is there any historical? There's some historical things in there. The archaeology that they put into the fourth game was horrible. Do not recommend. You can go and dig anywhere. No. Please don't do that in real life. Do not just go and find somewhere and dig. There's laws. But I've easily spent thousands and thousands of dollars over my life on these games that I've played, from Sims 1 to Sims 2 to Sims 3 to Sims 4, and now they've just announced Sims 5. Oh, sorry, it's not called Sims 5. It's under a working title, but they've just shown it at a big Sims Summit conference where they've shown all the development things. But like, there's going to be so much that, and all of these times that we've spent playing games, it's like, yes, it finally counts for something. I didn't waste my time.
Actually,
it certainly doesn't sound like a waste of time to me.
Can I ask a question?
Go for it.
I have a question for Ashley. Because we brought up this this game that is using the Assassin's Creed engine to create kind of a new game of simulation, right? And it's really making me think about video game mods, right? Especially when it comes to historical video games. So important. I can, a real life example, my own master supervisor, Sean, built an entire Civ mod that, more people, based on his research, that more people played than the people who actually read that initial research. gives you an idea of, the impact that this can actually have potentially. there's a lot of people, for instance, who will be looking at games who are like, oh no, this is not accurate or this is not okay, and then we'll switch them and like create a mod so that it actually fits more historically, because some people are, you know, are really passionate about it. At the same time, there's also the people who make very problematic mods, and for instance, will make everything fascist, as it happens. And so there's a lot of power that are both positive and negative, of course, when it comes to mods and using games and kind of creating kind of a new thing out of them, or just a new aspect to them. And so I just wanted your kind of thoughts on video game mods, especially when it comes to historical video games.
Yeah, I think modding is definitely something that is really cool. That it's, so for anyone that's not familiar, a mod or modification is something that you can add into a game that somebody has created outside of the development team to modify part of the game to change something. So in terms of, I'm just going to talk about what I'm familiar with, modding in Sims, you can add in new furniture, new clothing, or new career paths. Like you can not only change the cosmetics of the game, but also the running of the game and the playability of the game. So in games like things like Elder Scrolls, Skyrim and stuff that have giant modding communities that can add in new entire plot lines and storylines, and there's so much stuff that people, like with a lot of things in today's world, you'll get people that go into it with good intentions and wanting to make things like better and more accurate, or yep. So Danny's just added in the chat that in Skyrim, it is a medieval sort of fantasy game with dragons. There's a mod that you can get to change the dragons in Skyrim to Thomas the Tank Engine. So it's no longer giant dragons, it's giant Thomas the Tank Engine coming after you. Like things like that you can change, that's just a bit of fun, but you can also change them to make it more accurate or add in different things, new storylines that might reveal things about history or add in historical events and stuff. And you also have people that just will make a mod to make every female in the game scantily clad because they can. There's always going to be somebody with poor intentions, or not necessarily poor, but not the greatest intention. There's probably a lot of really bad mods. Even in Sims, people have created mods that if you're found with this mod, your entire account with EA, who is a giant games developer who makes a whole bunch of games, you will be banned if you are found with these mods for a life simulation game. That there's not much stock put into Sims within the wider gaming community. But yeah, so there's a whole bunch of things that you can do. And I think if we can get things where they are more accurate, like any mod, take it with a grain of salt. Like with any historical work or anything, if somebody's going, yeah, I've studied this, not to put more academic terms onto things, but if somebody's like, yeah, I've actually got a PhD in this area and I've added a mod to this game that makes it a bit more accurate, that does this, you're probably gonna, like, that would be a good thing to share and get more people playing, because it will get this more, I don't want to say correct, but more accurate knowledge that we can kind of put a bit more trust in. Rather than somebody who is like, well, I read a Wikipedia article and that said different, so I'm going to fix it. But yeah, so I think modding is definitely cool. And at the end of the day, there's only so much that a development team can do within the scope of the game, within the scope of their funding, within the scope of the company's aims and intentions with the game, within political things. And mods are a way that you can get around, share things more. The games can grow more than a development team could unfortunately ever do. But yeah.
Okay, thank you, Danny and Ashley. I don't know if there's a last, we still have time for a last question. If somebody wants to, or a comment or whatever thing you want to tell Danny and Ashley. I also remind you that this video is going to be uploaded to our Vimeo channel. So if, I mean, you can also replay it and see it there. Some people have logged off, but they have said Danny and Ashley to congratulations and that they're going to see the video afterwards. So that's great. So unless Danny and Ashley have any final comment or want to wrap up, I want to invite you also to, in November, we're going to have 3 special events with students from Brazil, Japan, and India. For the explorers, you are invited. I will get the posters out, but I want to know if Ashley or Danny would like to wrap up or say something else, or have another question for each other.
I think
No?
I'm pretty good on. I think we've gone through a whole bunch of different questions, like as Danny said earlier, the page of questions that I've got. I'm like, oh no, we talked about that one. Oh, we discussed that. That came up here. But yeah, I'd like to thank you, Jumana, for hosting this. There's, especially within my own stuff, there's not a lot of places where I can go and talk about gaming without people being like, really? That's in an environment where it's taken seriously and people are intrigued and interested. And yeah, so.
Well, thank both of you for accepting the invitation. I think it was a great session. It actually caught a lot of attention, and I'm sure the video is going to be replayed a lot of times. And also, I hope it's not the last time. I hope we can also maybe in the future make another about video games, but you will have to guide me because I wouldn't know. I mean, I'm just learning from you. So thank you very much for being here. And I'm going to stop the recording now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.